So we're just coming in on 7 o'clock, and usually in the next 2 minutes we get about another 30 people. So I'm gonna hang tight for a second.
I feel like I'm having a race with you, Sarah, to see who can let them in first.
I mean, usually I'm on that, but it's kind of nice.
Can I play?
Yeah.
Ooh, got one, Barry.
Oh, I thought I got it.
Hi, Claire. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Glad you could make it. We're very excited you're here.
Just got back from Council for Exceptional Children conference. So
I know. I saw that.
Yeah.
I really am jealous because my sister's in San Antonio and I was going to go see her and do the conference, but yeah, bills. My family seems to think they should eat every day, so
Whatever.
That is so pushy.
isn't
I
that
know. Ugh.
So last week for we were doing a lot on strength-based instruction, and Claire, we did a very brief overview of your teaching model, and I'm hopeful I'm going to have some folks for this class do that as like do a lesson plan based on your model for the class. So if I get any, I will definitely send them on to you. All right, I am going to have us go ahead and get started. Oops. So I'll throw the attendance in the chat again. But otherwise, guys, I'm really excited. Tonight we have some amazing guest speakers, most of whom did not send me their bios, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But we are, yeah, Karen, you're the only one who listened. So I'm really excited because these are some people who are preeminent researchers in the twice exceptional field, and I'm also excited that we're going to go through a 2-hour class and you're going to hear me talk for less than 10 minutes. That just makes my day. What I will tell you is some of the stuff in the background I'm going to be doing is answering questions you guys have asked me in the last week and a half. I will get the videos uploaded onto YouTube because I figured that's what's going to keep Canvas from crashing on me constantly. So all of our weekly videos will be on a YouTube link and you can go watch them there. And I will have also videos like I have Matt and Claire's presentations from earlier semesters. I'll have them up there linked into the classroom. So you guys are welcome to watch those as a makeup for any of the classes that you've missed. We are off the next 2 weeks because yay, spring break. And then we just have the 8th and the 15th left. But you have until April 29th, I think I said, May 1st, something like that, to get all the work done. And if you are worried about the project, just shoot me an email, let me know. I do have the link if you want to make an appointment to talk to me during the day about what you want to work on for your project. If you are currently in the middle of like an intensive consult with me, that is your project because I'm making you do work for it. So we can talk through what that's going to look like as far as grading goes. I think that's it, unless anyone has any other like kind of housekeeping course questions for me. And if not, I am going to hand it over to Dr. Karen Arnstein and Barry Gelston.
Thank you, Sarah. Did
You're
you do
quite
the like? Did you send them the bio? I don't know if I should introduce myself.
Yeah, you definitely should because I was waiting for everyone's bio, Barry, and I didn't get them, Barry, so I didn't get a chance to send them out. So yes, please, if you guys would introduce yourselves.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. And thank you, Sarah, for having us tonight. And thank you for our guests coming, for Jenny, Ryan, Claire, Norma, Matt. So thank you all for being here. So we're hoping that we're going to have a really good time. We've got a lot of interactive components of our presentation tonight. And we'd love to get your thoughts and ideas too. But a little bit about me. So I am a postdoctoral researcher at Purdue University. I work with Dr. Rick Olenchek and a team using positive psychology as another way to identify traditionally underrepresented students for gifted and talented services. I'm also a core faculty member at Bridges Graduate School, and I'm also a teacher. I still teach 4th through 8th grade for gifted and twice exceptional students online who cannot attend regular public school because they just cannot fit in that environment. So Barry, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Barry Gelston. I am a doctoral candidate at Bridges Graduate School, and Dr. Arnstein is actually my doctoral advisor. And we've been working on this research together for about 6 or 7 years before I ever got it to Bridges, and she was finishing up her doctorate. And people know me as Mr. Gelston, who teaches math to 2E kids online. And for a while there, I was president of Gifted Homeschoolers Forum. So we come to this from different angles and different perspectives. And the work that we're going to share with you tonight is a synthesis of research that Karen's been doing and what I am currently doing in my dissertation. And we hope it's interesting. So, and I just want to say thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you inviting us, and I think you're a hoopy fruit.
So let's go ahead and get started, Barry. So tonight, this is called Applying the Spiral Model of Development, or the SMD, for classroom success. So Barry and I will both be talking to you about this tonight. You may be like, what's a spiral model? Okay, we're going to get into that. Don't worry.
So this is my favorite slide. I'm the one who made this one because about 6 or 7 years ago, Karen was working on this idea about how kids don't look the same as 2E kids. And she was really just like a typical 2E adult trying to figure out, how do you make sense of this? And she was making all kinds of tools and devices. And so I likened it to Close Encounter of the Third Kind. And together, she got me into this obsessive journey to build this spiral model. And we've been having a really great time doing it.
So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and put in the chat, put your job title. What's your role? If you wouldn't mind putting that in there.
And that's just so that we can find out who you are. So we have a sense of our audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is good.
Yeah, lots of people putting, school psychologist. Okay.
Yeah.
School
Different
psych.
grades.
Yeah, definitely. Elementary school, high school. Staff development teacher. Oh, and we have an SLP. We've got a few of them. Okay. Wow.
Nice.
I am
Thank
proud
you.
of the
Special ed
diversity.
teacher.
I say I'm proud of the diversity of my classes, because
Yes.
we can hit so many more students and help so many more students because of the number and different types of people who come.
Wow, look at this. Special ed teacher, autism program, single subject. This is amazing. Case manager. Great. So then, Barry, we did this right. Okay. We wanted to make sure this is for everybody. So we did this right. Good. Thank you so much for sharing your job title in here. Go ahead, Barry. You can start.
So I want to start off with some humility. We're going to talk about our definition of 2E and ME. And we know that we did not create the definition for twice exceptional. This nice work by Sally Reese and Susan Baum et al. To do that, but we want to build on that. And you'll see a lot of what we talk about isn't about replacing people's thoughts, but how do we reframe it so that it makes more sense today? And today we can look at 2E and really multi-exceptionality as the intersection of multiple exceptionalities and other factors. So an exceptionality is when you think of outliers for different reasons, but it's more than just outliers, it's also different factors that we'll talk more about that impact learning and development.
So the real problem here that a lot of us have seen, whether we're in the classroom or working with kids as a school psychologist, a case manager, et cetera, is that we know that 2E and even multi-exceptional learners, they do not always present as expected, especially compared to their typically developing peers. Now, a lot of times they can appear like wildly out of sync, right? Significant swings in where they're either ahead or behind their peers in their class. And this can fall in any of those domains, like the social domain, the cognitive or academic, emotionally or physically. And when 2E learners are misunderstood, we don't really, because it's difficult to have a 2E profile. It's almost impossible. Differentiation is not always well matched to either their strengths or their areas of challenge. And this can lead to the development of maladaptive behavior, which we don't want. And we also know that educators may struggle with knowing when to differentiate, how to challenge those areas of strength while staying within the curriculum and the scope and sequence, and also while understanding and supporting those areas of weakness. So you're really at the circus doing a lot of juggling here. So this is about the whole child. You're going to hear this term a few times tonight. To us, this is about understanding diversity, that it provides a broader approach for how we respond. And so what Barry and I are really looking at is just 3 different areas of diversity. We've got cognitive diversity, the neurological diversity, that could include those learning differences, right? And then we have cultural diversity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. There's also 4 domains of development to consider. There's social, emotional, physical, and intellectual. If people tell you social and emotional is the same domain, it is not. They're two very different processes of development there. So what we're asking is to reassess our expectations of our twice exceptional or multi-exceptional learners as compared to their age peers. We also know that there's a lot of different perspectives. We've got the family perspective, the professionals, the teachers, right? The medical perspective, but we still have one unique child. So we've got lots of different points of view. And sometimes we have a lack of common cultural understanding and even a lack of common language terminology to use to be able to understand each other. So one of those questions we ask is, do we decide how do we meet that student's needs? Do we base this on district benchmarks, or do we base it on curriculum proficiency? Maybe it's their behavior or social skills. I can tell you all examples of many college students that I have taught over the years who have actually chosen any one of those to be able to decide how do we meet that child's needs. Barry?
And we all want to respect the dignity of each person who comes to our classroom and respond to their needs because they are important. It's about individual education and how important each child is.
So speaking about the individual, we know that there's a lot of interaction that happens with the characteristics. So sometimes this is just gifted asynchrony, right? They have a whole psychological makeup themselves. There may be overexcitabilities that's occurring simultaneously, or there may be learning differences as well. So you've got a lot of interaction going on here. And what we know is that this has this multiplicative, right? It's almost an exponential impact for all the interaction that's happening here on the ability to practice both the cognitive and the non-cognitive skills, right? So those cognitive skills is like those classroom skills that we know about, being able to partake in the curriculum. But there's also those non-cognitive skills, like the social, emotional, and even physical skills. You can have a student, I had a friend of mine whose sons were profoundly gifted. They started college at 12, but struggled to tie their shoes. So you can have a lot of asynchrony there. So we're going to go back in time for just a minute. Just a little bit of a time warp here. We knew that in the 20th century, there was a lot of new thinking that was happening, both in psychology and in brain development and what we understood. And that really started with Freud and moved through Piaget, who was quite instrumental. I'm sure many of you have read at least some of their work or knew about them from your pre-service training. Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration is very much focused on the gifted, especially profoundly gifted populations. And then Erickson, you may have heard of the 8 stages of psychosocial development and what we should expect at certain developmental ages. And so especially in the 60s. And so what we wanted to do is we really started thinking about that it's time to integrate, not leave behind, but integrate what we do know that are very two-dimensional, almost stair-step models of development to a more multi-dimensional 21st century perspective. My goodness, we all have Google Earth, and we can do a lot more visualization now than we could have even 20 years ago. Barry, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think you're doing great. Go ahead.
Thanks. So the spiral model of development really describes the impacts of the environment, of giftedness and learning differences on the appearance of competence for twice exceptional, multi-exceptional gifted learners. So what is that typical appearance of competence? What does that mean anyway, right? Well, let's step back for a second. You probably are all familiar with a bell curve or a Gaussian curve. It's a normal distribution here. So we know that on the left side, we've got our special education, the yellow, right? So they may fall like 1 or 2 standard deviations of the mean or the average, which is 0. We have our general education classroom. So even for our SLPs here, they're going to have kids from all of these groups. And that's 68.2% of your students. And this is a typical normal distribution. It's not always what happens. But then you've got your kiddos who are orange, and those are your gifted kids. So they may be the second or above standard deviation. So most states, the cut score is like 130, I believe it is, for either IQ testing or a certain number on a COGAT, let's say. But that's where you're going to see they're going to be further over to the right. Now, what happens with our twice exceptional students is they may not always make that score to get into gifted and talented programmings, but we know that they are gifted because they're also 2E. They have a learning difference here. And as Kermit the Frog says, it's not always easy being green. So Barry, I know you wanted to add something here.
So the interesting point here is that studying the green here provides us insight, not just to supporting the gifted with learning issues, but it really, we can take this and apply this, a lot of this, to the rest of the population as well. So the model that we're working on, although it starts with the 2E and the multi-exceptional population, which is valuable to us because we can look at strong outliers and how that influences things on the edges, but still all the things that we're doing as educators still matter. And taking this perspective that we're sharing today will matter across the whole spectrum of learners.
Thank you. So let's take another way of looking at this. The spiral model is one way to look at that, to understand in a more three-dimensional approach that the lack of fit for these kids in the typical educational environment, that can actually act as this pressure point, pushing these kids into dysregulation. They may appear to sometimes stagnate or even regress while you have them as a student. It also explains those developmental growth spurts. So they may spend time in that stagnation or what appears to be regression to just having that almost a slingshot effect where they leapfrog over months, sometimes months and months and months, and they just get it. So for those of you who do teach 2E kids, I'm seeing some nodding here, like yes, or if you parent a 2E child, you will understand this one as well. And so the reason I have this here too is that on the left, I use this GIF to be able to have a really good understanding of this. This is our solar system moving through the universe. Now, we may think that we're kind of in place, almost geostationary, but we're not. We're also moving. And so you see the planets, they're elliptical orbits. are moving around the sun. And some of them are moving faster in their revolution around the sun. Some of them are moving slower, and some of them have more elliptical orbits. But we need to think about our students this way too. They're not all going to be moving at that same pace. And sometimes they're going to speed up, and sometimes they're going to slow down. So another way to think about this, and I was thinking about this too, is that it was such a paradigm shift for me as well, is that we tend to have these expectations that are based a lot on like Newton's orbit, his vision of what our solar system looked like. It was expected, like we had a nice circular path. It was an expected orbit of the planets around the sun. Some moved faster than others, but again, it was a perfectly circular orbit. And a lot of times as teachers, we kind of expect that too. Our curriculum forces us to be expecting that, oh, at this point in time in October, we should be at this piece of curriculum, for example. But it's not always that way, because the reality is going to look far more like what Kepler saw as our orbit. So we've got planets that have very circular orbits around the sun. Some of them are far more elliptical, like Pluto. Some planets are moving faster, and some are going to be moving slower in their orbit. Barry, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay, so this is where I think of our 2E and ME students as Pluto. Their orbit, Pluto's orbit is so highly elliptical, right? It defines that 2E students' three-dimensional trajectory for growth and development. It's kind of like that old saying, even a clock is wrong twice a day, right? So when we think about this, if we think of the sun as our average, our regression line, our mean, and where our students are going to be probably clustered like tighter planets around that as we move through curriculum, we have kids in our classroom who are just really out there sometimes. And it's okay to say that too. Sometimes they may really appear to be out there. They may not want to focus on the curriculum that you have to teach for your scope and sequence. And they may be off on some other tangent and really wanting to dive deep into it. But our scope and sequence kind of forces us to be on a traditional trajectory. So it's important to understand that this may actually be some of the causes why we see some of these behaviors in the classroom as well.
So this is a good slide for us to do two things. One is stop and ask you questions and see where you are and what you would like to just share your thoughts or ask us questions. And at the same time, if you can put in the chat, ask you a question here about, and we created a term, 2E typical behaviors. Now on the previous slide, we talked about atypical behaviors. And what we know and what we've been talking about here is that regular students, quote unquote, have typical responses that teachers are trained to typically respond to. But if you could take a moment and just reply down below two different types of here, can you come back to that, Karen?
Oh yeah, you bet. Let me get back to that. Sorry about that.
Yeah. All right. So really, there are two types of atypical behaviors that I ask you to think about. The first one is, what is that weird stuff that the kid's doing that is not typical, that is you would not expect in a regular classroom, but you can be like, well, okay, I can live with that. And I just acknowledge that that's their thing. And then you have the other ones, which are like, whoa, this is too much, and I need to respond to it. So hopefully, did that make sense, the question? And if so, see if you can respond in the chat and think of both types. And if anybody wants to come online, Sarah, if anybody raises their hand or wants to, this is a good time to have some open discussion at this point.
We have a lot of new messages here.
So I'm seeing I can ignore the constant moving and tapping. I think that's answer number one.
Yeah.
Difficulty with transitions, with relationships, blurting out, hyper-focusing, Yeah, this is good stuff. Hyper focusing on one topic. I can ignore blurting out, can ignore moving, singing, narrating while working. I can ignore whistling quietly, refusing to work with others, wanting to work alone.
Oh,
Ignore never having a pencil. Thank you, Sarah. As a math teacher, that used to drive me nuts in the classroom. It's like I used to spend so much money on pencils. I cannot ignore the touching and yelling. I can
oh.
ignore the standing up and moving around. So
Yeah.
this is a pretty good sample of what I've been finding in my research. 99th percentile in reading and math, frustration, crying. Now it's getting too fast for me. I can ignore constant motion. I can ignore funny, evil voice. Anybody want to do one for us just to show us? I can ignore the crying. Very good. Ignore getting up, flexible seating, interruptions. Yeah, so this is really a big chunk of it. And so a big part of what we want to talk about is that here we have such a wealth of knowledge and information that people can share
Yeah.
with each other. And that, as I was saying before, we're not presenting, or as Karen was saying, we're not presenting something new, but a new way to look at it. And just a bit of a perspective change so that you can allow yourselves to respond in this way. So does anybody have before we move on to the next slide, we're all about open discussion here. Should I call on somebody? You in the back row throwing the golf balls? All right, Todd, you're up. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh, so go ahead, Todd. Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. Todd, go ahead.
no, I
He's
thought I was being
laughing.
forced to say something, so I wanted to
You were.
clarify what I was being forced to say.
All right, I
I
don't see a
legit
hand
promised
raised.
him like an hour ago that nobody was going to call on him and make him say
Oh,
anything
God.
tonight.
No. Oh, no. Oh, that's awful. Sorry, Todd. So let's keep going then. Go ahead, Barry.
So what is a spiral model of development? Well, to start off with, it examines the outliers. And we've said that a few times, but in the outliers comes a story of how we can support everybody, but also at the same time, outliers need supported too, because they're not a part of that 68% in the middle. It takes a lot of extra resources and moving away from the typical work of a system in order to support the outliers. Karen?
So it's also exploring what teachers do that works. And by the way, this isn't really documented. There's not a lot of documentation. And I mean, it's just like saying, okay, well, what's a 2E profile, right? It's almost impossible to come up with this. And everybody as teachers, we all have our different limits as well. So what do teachers do that works? And we're going to explore that tonight because we've got some research and some data on that. Different exceptionalities produce unique behaviors, and I love saying this, that make the atypical 2E typical. What does that mean, Barry?
Typical. I love the term 2E typical. I'm glad we came up with it. I've already said the fourth one. And the next thing is that we need to move beyond the medical model to understand each child in their own context. So you may ask, what is the medical model? So there's this weird debate sometimes about talking about strength-based and not understanding it and feeling that it's an overreaction. But let me start off with the medical model. The medical model is pretty wonderful. It fixes broken arms, heart disease. It does a lot of great stuff. They see a plumbing problem, they diagnose it, they see it, they fix it, they make it all better. Sometimes though, if somebody has a chronic disease or illness, the relationship to medicine and to the person with a disability actually changes the person's identity. And that's where we see it becoming a problem. It's a great quote from an author named Gehring. And they wrote, one result of the common medical understanding of disability is that people with disabilities often report feeling excluded, undervalued, pressured to fit a questionable norm, and or treated as if they were globally incapacitated. I think this is pretty powerful stuff. And you say, well, but that's medicine. How is that in school? Because in school, we then take, and I got my copy of the DSM, I don't know, what am I up to, 47 here? DSM-5 TR on my desk next to me. And I open that up and it's a book full of disorders, and kids start to become a collection of disorders or alphabet soup instead of being individuals. And those initials, those alphabets and all that start to change how a student feels about themselves. And that in and of itself inadvertently can create maladaptive behavior. Aaron?
So this is why context matters. So when we think about this, this is really about the teacher and the learner, the mutual adaptation that happens when they're together. So what you're seeing here is, and some of you will recognize this, this is actually Bronfenbrenner and his work for the bioecological systems model. And what we see here is that mutual adaptation, it's characterized by a very complex set of relationships here. And that is where you see the child is at the center here within, but you also see those two arrows, they're going both ways because the child both influences and is influenced by their environment. And the same is true. The teacher both influences and is influenced by the environment. And when I say environment, that could be the state, it could be their district, it could be their building itself. What is the culture in that building? And both of those are actually influenced by the cultural attitudes and ideologies of the time and the location. Barry, I know you wanted to add more here.
The piece here that's important is that we put in teacher-learner mutual adaptation. Now, this is important because usually when you look at these models, especially the older models, where they start off and they're trying to start from an atomistic perspective. Oh, we have a child and the child is developing and growing and adapting to the world around them. And so example, you have family, so the child develops a relationship in the family and they learn from everything in the family and what the family knows, what their habits are. But when we get into an educational context, we have to accept that the teacher is also originally a child too. And that they're also an active player in this model. And they're not, and when I was young, we used to talk about professionals being kind of, I don't know if I'm using the right term, antiseptic, where they shouldn't over-engage, they shouldn't be too involved because it's about only the child, but that's not true. What we know is that in successful education and teaching and every profession, that it's about communication, it's about making a positive connection, and that both the teacher and the learner are mutually adapting to each other, and they both have their own history that comes together and bounces, merges, and interacts with each other, which is a part of the challenge on how do we engage learners and how do we do this, Karen?
So we do this by really thinking about, and this is Bronfenbrenner's too, which is the process person context time, or the PPCT. And so Barry, go ahead, I will go ahead and run this, but when we think about this, we're considering the process that we're engaged in with the people, yourself, your coworkers, the children, the students over time. So think about it like this starts to become multidimensional here. You have to take into account, right, the exceptionalities, their race. I mean, there's so many different pieces here that are factors that make this up. And Barry, go ahead. I will go ahead and run this here for you.
So started to say this before, we'll say it again. So inside of this, it's not just a person and the context, which we've talked about, but that they engage in processes with each other. And that's what we want to share with you tonight. And that those processes and the people and the context all change over time based on relationships, historical events, or just the natural gradual change in the zeitgeist that we often see.
And I'm going to throw something out there too, is that every student could be considered multi-exceptional, because you need to take things into account beyond race or ethnicity or language differences. And even that there are differences in exceptionalities, but to also think about culture, health, school, your gender, your socioeconomic status, that we not only as educators are coming from, but so are the children.
So it starts off, as we were saying before, there's an active dyad. That's the term that Bronner uses. And different ways to say this: teacher, student, educator, learner, depending on how you want to frame that relationship. And just simply to that point that I think I've overstated a few times now, that they're both in reaction to each other. They're both adapting to each other, and they have a mutual relationship.
So, but let's think about this. The focus is always on the students, but what about the context for the teachers? So all of us are coming in, depending on where you were trained and you did your teacher education from, and you may have done it in a different state other than Maryland, and now you live in Maryland, right? So we are a loosely sort of collected group of states, and each state has different requirements as well. So you have to think about, what is the context? What kind of pedagogical theories is the teacher coming in with? Are they constructivist, right? Are they a behaviorist? What are their processes? And by the way, even for those of us in this room here, if you're in special education, gifted education, or you believe in strengths-based education, now you're going to have even more diverse theories and processes that you would use in your toolbox as well. And then thinking about the family background. What's your background? What's your family of origin? What do you bring to your classroom and to your teaching that maybe somebody else doesn't? So, my race, my gender, my religion, my background, where I grew up, all of those pieces are going to come into play here. And then finally, there's also cultural opinions on achievement and work. Some of us have been in high achieving schools. Some of us are not. Some of us, have a different perspective on work as well as achievement. Do you want to be principal one day? Or, some of us we all have those different perspectives.
I want to go back to the first bullet for a second, Karen,
Sure.
which is that when we're learning to become teachers, and we are teachers, and we pick up another book and we're learning, the important thing to know here is that all of this context and pedagogy and theories and processes, if all things are going well, they improve and change every year. And what you learned last week and the week before that here in Sarah's class or in your pre-service education, all of this is fluid. And this fluidity is part of what we throw into. That's the part of the river that we're jumping into at this point in time. And those are the tools that we're able to use in order to make decisions.
So we also have to consider that your perspectives are going to change over time, right? You are not the same person you were 10 years ago. You're not the same teacher you were during your first year, right? So your perspectives, your experience comes into play. So we have to consider time, which is what makes this four-dimensional. Also, the time working with your students, right? You bring away and you learn from the students that you have over the years. And then you've got changes within your own career, right? Have you moved from one area to another area, for example? So we do have to consider the time aspect here. I know we have a little stop sign. So Barry, did you want to ask a specific question? Or ask
No, I'd like to just give people a chance, but I also want to make this point is that with teachers' perspective changing over time, part of the reason why we're saying this, outside of the fact that it fits the model, is that we want you to know that you are free and you should be free to change. And that, I hate to use the name because it develops, but the whole Carol Dweck thing of fixed mindset versus, a changing mindset. I forgot the exact
the
term for it,
growth
but
mindset.
Right. So you're allowed to grow, you're allowed to change. And being an expert means that you get to change over time, and getting to change in collaboration with your coworkers and with the learner. is really what you're doing. Both you and the learner can grow together. And that's a part of the perspective change as well, knowing that we're all in it together. So we've gotten to this point here, and so are there any questions before we go forward? We really want to, we have plenty of time. So any thoughts, questions you'd like to share, please do. Anybody want to raise their hand?
I think we're in good shape.
Okay, but you're going to have to ask questions at the very end when we're done. So
Sarah's
what we've
checking.
come down, yeah, I'll be checking. There'll be homework. So in our pursuit to understand this model, and this is something that is really coming out of my research right now, is looking at the processes that are involved. Now, it's interesting because the work I've done dovetails perfectly with the work that Karen's been doing over the years as well. And we've come up with that there are two main processes, and they're kind of integrated with each other. Go ahead. And I want to start with the top. So up top, and I'm just going to cover this broadly because we're going to jump into it in a little bit more detail, is that up top we have what we're all taught in school, is that we engage in planning, and this good teacher teaching stuff. You know, we do all of our preparation, we get our instructional method, physical setting, curriculum, differentiation, but this process is distal or separate from the learner. But everybody knows who's ever been in a classroom, all that goes out the window once you say, "Hey kids, how you doing?" So at that point, teachers are, for better or worse, and at different levels, are engaged in this proximal process that we're calling adaptive connection. And this adaptive connection, especially within the realm of 2E, asks us to first acknowledge and accept that there's such a thing as 2E typical behavior. And we'll get into that more in a bit, but this is unusual behavior that in any other place would not make sense, but here it does. And that the teacher engages in a big C professional creativity process of engaging in curiosity, investigation, and improvisation. And then when they see something happen, either they can make an improvisation in the moment to make things okay, or they can go back up top to engage in the distal process. And these are the things we've been talking about. All right, Karen.
So this is a lot of where my research had focused on originally a few years ago, which is the planning process or the distal process. So a lot of this really covered, the instructional methods that we engage in, curriculum, differentiation, and physical setting. And I'm actually going to go into each of these. I just wanted to give you all kind of a highlight of what this one encompassed. So when we think about this, the teachers that I interviewed for my research, they are twice exceptional teachers. They've been teaching 2E kids, 4th through 6th grade, for anywhere ranging from 5 to about 8 years between the two of them. And so what they found was this really big shift in their perspectives of teaching 2E kids versus Gen A kids, okay? So what they focused on was that in the early years was, I have to deliver this curriculum, right? This is my scope and sequence. This is what my district says I need to be on it this month and this week and this day. I need to deliver curriculum no matter what, period. But their perspectives really shifted. So from delivering curriculum, it shifted to communication, to be able to communicate better with their students, to be able to understand them, and also understanding their needs. It actually made delivering curriculum easier, but they didn't know this in the beginning of teaching 2E kids. The second one was actually about homogeneous grouping, right? So you do that, and I saw this in the chat. Several people put grouping in the chat too. They focused on homogeneous grouping in the beginning, but realized, wait, I can actually use heterogeneous grouping to be able to do more differentiation without having to do more of like separate assignments all the time between kids. So sometimes using grouping in that way was very helpful. And then finally, they focus so much on curriculum development, right? Lesson planning, which yes, we all have to do, but they shifted the focus from just doing curriculum development to developing relationships with their students. Because by doing that, they were able to identify their kids' strengths and challenges. Now that's important as we move forward here. But this is their early years and as their perspective shifts. So what happened was that as they were engaging in this, they found that they were actually becoming masters of differentiation in several ways. So when you think about this, 2E, you're going to have kids sometimes based on whatever you teach. If you're a single subject, you may have students who are not gifted in that subject that you teach. So what do you do, right? Because they know that they're gifted, but they're also struggling with this, right? Like, oh, I know I could do this, but I don't want to do it because I want to do math instead. That's my safe space. That's where I'm good. So what they had to really explain in their process was that they always began with empathy about this with the student. Helping them to find value in that subject. If English is really hard, if writing is just such a challenge for them to string together a paragraph, right? Help them find value in this based on their areas of interest and their goals. They help them to make connections to those areas of interest. Maybe somebody's very interested in science, and that's their subject is math and science, where they're gifted, so they're struggling with writing. But to help them understand, here's where you're going to need writing in the future. Let's kind of work on it now, and then giving them prompts or assignments to help them to continue to make those connections. Then they encourage them to be successful in their non-gifted areas, right? It's very easy to be successful in an area that's easy for us. But what about the areas that's a little bit more challenging? We don't always think, well, maybe I'll just get a C. What if you shoot for an A-? Right? Let's actually set some goals to be successful in a non-gifted area. And then finally, encouraging open-mindedness, because sometimes we don't know where our paths or our careers are going to lead us. I sure don't. This is the second career for me, and I did not expect that it would be this. I'm going to tell you, after working in software and GIS development for 13 years, would never have guessed this would be my second career. So I'm glad that I have people who are open-minded and helping me to be open-minded too. But then what if you have those students who are gifted in the subject that you teach, right? What do you do at this point? How do you push them? How do you push them out of, well, I've got this, right? And out of that comfort zone so that they can be challenged to grow further. So this is where the teachers really talked about supporting and challenging those areas of those advanced abilities. It's not always more work. Sometimes it could be even like ethical issues that the kid will write about, right? It just depends. They also work to assist their students to shift. So this is where you move from just rote memorization, right? Oh, I've got this, I know how to do it, to maybe considering more of the shades of gray. Like I said, sometimes it's tackling an ethical issue. Sometimes it's, think about those gifted prompts, right? And then finally, they encourage their students to hold a more mature perspective in their area of giftedness. And sometimes that means understanding their strength. And sometimes it also means that this could be a potential career in the future, but to think further into the future about this. Barry, I'm going to take a break.
Yay, done a great job. So the other process here, as I've mentioned before, is this adaptive connection. And just restate this, acknowledge and accept that there is such a thing as 2E typical behavior, and that you need to respond to it, and that the teacher engages in a creative professional process of curiosity, investigation, and improvisation. Now, the interesting thing about this is that the first case I'll share with you is that it actually leads back to what happens in planning in the classroom. And so Karen, in her work, actually created an adaptive connection in action, looking at changes in planning.
So if you think about this, and I observed several classrooms being able to come up with this, as well as the neuroscience and the educational research that also backs it. So we have to think about this. Now, sometimes we'll be doing this planning and we're setting up our classrooms in the beginning of the year. Other times we have to adapt to the kids that we do have, right? So we don't always know who we're going to get in the beginning of this school year. So this is actually broken up into 4 sections. So the first is the classroom setup, right? This is our physical setting. Not every teacher has flexible seating. Not every teacher has all of the, yoga balls or whatever we have, right? Like different seats and things like this. But you might have just setting up your table groups so that you have a walking corridor within your classroom, because you've got ADHD kids who, in order to be able to get the neurotransmitters going and to get their chemicals going, to be able to process what they're learning and possibly discuss, they need to be moving, right? And so you can even be having a walking corridor. I have a perfect example. I had an 8th grade English learner who, great kid, but was absolutely couldn't control his body. He was either talking to everybody around him, he's touching people, right? Like, this will sound familiar. We were working on a book for English at the time. And I said, you know what? I moved a seat. So he just had a little more elbow room. And he stood during class almost the entire time. But he was engaged in our book that we were reading. He was asking questions. It was literally a 180 in his behavior in class. And it was something that was so simple. Everybody was fine with it. I said, if you need to stand to be able to do this, stand. And while we're reading, it's fine. So things like your classroom may not be Pinterest worthy. So I'll just put it to you right there, because you have to look for things like the stimuli. Is there too much visual stimuli for your kids? Is it just overwhelming them and their nervous system? And it could be something too as simple as just changing your lighting, right? I've met plenty of people, both adults and kids, who hear the fluorescent bulbs. They literally hear it and they can see the flickering. Yeah, Barry, but I don't. So it's okay to be open about this with students too, and just saying, look, we're going to make a classroom that's going to work for all of us. And so having a clear checklist helps us to see what we really have in front of us versus what we think we have in front of us, and how our classroom is set up. And I know in terms of productivity supports, I'm sure every single person here has their posted rules and procedures and expectations in their classroom, clearly written directions, probably color coded too. I cannot tell you guys how many times I've been in classrooms, teachers did not have those. It was shocking. 6th grade class didn't have it. And not only did this teacher have behavior problems with her gen ed students, she had problems with her gifted kids too. So because she was missing these things. So some of this we take for granted, right? But some of it, so that's why having a checklist is really, really helpful here. You know what? I did want to ask, did anybody want to make a comment or have a question on this one?
Actually,
I know
Carlson
this one is,
has his hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. This is really a really cool table here. One comment. Just think I have a class full of 2E students. I mean, they're only 6. It's a self-contained class, and one thing that I've tried, I kind of visualize a lot of these students kind of working in a lot of creative or just kind of different kind of workplaces. And so one thing that I look at is, what are effective like 2E work environments, and like where these guys could be at, and I think of like, remember like the like in Silicon Valley, they had all the, they would have like this kind of play area, all ping pong tables, arcade machines and stuff like that. So I think there's a classroom, especially for a lot of these students, especially when they have like issues with, bonding or getting to know their classmates, if they just want to focus on that, just giving them opportunities to bond, so, Legos or blocks for me. I mean, I teach 6th grade, but, just those kind of a mundane activity
Oh yeah.
where, our opportunities to bond. And I think that creates kind of a real welcoming environment too, just kind of a whimsical fun, like they know like this class is a little different. This classroom, it's not, it's got a little vibe to it. That's all.
One of the classrooms that I observed, Carlson, had the rules. And it was like the 10, thou shalt not type rules. And it was around Halloween that I observed it. I took a picture of it too. And it was like rule number 11, even though the title said 10, and it said thou shalt not dab, right? Like, I mean, it was just so funny and like silly. And this teacher taught 4th through 6th grade humanities, right? So you've got that big age range in there, and they can still be silly. But I do have plenty of photos of like different setups. Some kids want to work in a table group, and they'll do fabulous. Some of them need natural light, right? So they need to be near a window or something, or having that light near them, and they do really well. I saw one where there was a beanbag on the floor. That was actually a workstation with a clipboard. There was another one this teacher set up as a workstation where the student's back was to the rest of the class, and they had their own light on the desk and their whole setup right there in the corner. But that kid thrived not having all of the everybody else's movement and right, all that visual and auditory, and they have headphones. So they did a lot, even with colors, like taking a piece of cloth, like a pale piece of fabric, not a pattern, and they actually kind of nailed it to the top of the bookshelf. So all of the things on the shelves were kind of put away. So again, you're reducing the visual stimuli. So I have lots of that kind of stuff. I can show you pictures. I saw some more things in the chat too. Let me see here.
Karen, one of the things I'm hearing you say with all this is, like, I feel like what I run into when I go out and do my consult work is I either have the teachers who have all this stuff in their classroom and they're using it for all of their students, or I run into the teachers who have I run into the teachers who are much more rigid in how they approach their classrooms and what that classroom setup looks like. And so it becomes an inconvenience to provide these supports for the students. And it's a really hard learning curve. And I guess that's one thing I wonder about, especially for some of my secondary teachers who are here, who are members of PLCs and might want to bring this up into their classrooms. Or conversely, a lot of our secondary teachers don't have their own classrooms and they're sharing that space, which means they have to get other adults on board with them doing this. And so I guess that's part, it's not really a well-phrased question, but just, how do we bring in this conversation that adaptive classroom planning should be the norm and not the fallback, or we shouldn't be constantly like backfitting everything, is not the word I'm looking for, retrofitting everything for a couple of kids if we think proactively about it.
Can I tell you, I actually think this is the easy part, by the way. The physical setting, the classroom setup, this is actually the easy part. The teachers I interviewed for my study, they had a student, so this one, I was giving you guys the example of this humanities teacher, and he had a student, they were doing, I think it was Greek mythology, and he had a student who was really struggling to write a paragraph, let alone a 5-paragraph essay, okay? I mean, just the anxiety, right? And trying to elope or task avoidance, and now you see more behaviors. But he said this kid was so like deep into the Marvel universe. Like he could tell you who the screenwriters were and the directors and the this and the that and the backstories of everybody, and then the who directed the music. I mean, it was just insane how much this kid knew. And so what he told him is he said, well, sure, but you don't have to write about a Greek mythological hero as long as you use the hero archetype, let's say, right? So apply it to somebody in the Marvel universe, and you can write about that person, but follow the same standards for that 5-paragraph essay. And all of a sudden, this kid was like, wait, what? I can do that? And then, because he was talking to him, the other kids around him were like, wait, is that an option for me too? Now, not all of them took the option, but it was the idea that they had choice in it, right? They had an option to be able to do it. So that, I think, is actually the harder part, because we're not taught that in a pre-service program. to be able to differentiate like that, to be able to think a little bit broader and to think about our students' interests. And he wouldn't have known it if he hadn't developed those relationships.
So I
So
want
I'm
to
going to keep going,
interject.
but we'll definitely open this up for discussion too. I just wanted to give that one example because it was a good one.
And Karen, they
I want
also
to
asked if I
interject
could have a copy
something
of
here.
the checklist.
Sure.
Yeah. So I want to interject a response as well, which is that part of the beauty of what you're doing here, Sarah, is exactly that. By having a wide diversity of people within your system engaging in this conversation, if this is what you feel is of value, the fact that you're all here, you can communicate, you can collaborate with each other, and it's a part of the relationships that you all develop. And it's about taking this back and starting these conversations in your own buildings with the people that you work with, and keep this conversation going with each other as well. And obviously, if you want to communicate with us, we have our contact information at the end.
And I think Claire just wanted to bring something in really quick. Go ahead, Claire. Oh, you're muted. Put $1 in the jar.
4 years in, and we're still like, you're on mute. I wanted to, I'm so excited that you're sort of presenting these sort of very specific ideas and things that teachers can do and adapt to kids, and to sort of really think about that. One of the things that I wanted to encourage everyone to talk about, and I'll have more details later, is that at Cleveland State, we're running a Twice Exceptional Teacher Education Conference in September. But we're starting it off with a Action Research Institute, where we're teach teachers to think about specific changes or specific things that they want to do in class, in their classroom, and then do some research as to how is it working, what's the impact, and to think through that kind of process. These are some specific, absolutely fabulous ideas about things that could be done. What I'd love to do is encourage y'all to think about how you could look and see what the impact actually is on your kids, so that we know that teachers stay teaching when we see impact. And so I want to think about that strategy of impacts. Thanks,
Thank
Karen.
you.
Because I'm so excited about these, like, very responsive kind of approaches.
Well, we have an example here that I wanted Barry to share from his current research.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things to look at is not just in planning, but there are things that can happen in the moment as well. So here's a very light, simple example of a teacher with a pseudonym Phoenix, teacher Phoenix, and how they go through a simple 3-step process here. And I'll just read the quotes to you. So I also had another student who was identified as twice exceptional in 2019, who would get very anxious, especially when completing tests or individual assignments. It didn't matter whether it was a test or a writing assignment or a math worksheet. She would find different ways to either distract herself or distract others. So it's definitely something that requires intervention. She would get up out of her seat. It would be much more distraction. She would walk over to other students or peek into other desks or things, almost as a task avoidance. So it was at this moment when teacher Phoenix says, something's going on here. I recognize a 2E typical behavior. She knew that this is what happens with her kids, and she had been thinking about this, and she was curious about it. Go ahead.
There we go.
So she did some investigation, and very simply, she did some research on how sometimes students with autism like having a weighted blanket or something that could help them calm down or feel comfortable. So this is not earth-shattering information that I just gave you, right? But it's just showing how a teacher in the moment takes something that maybe she was thinking about or cared about. She saw a problem with a child, and she said, you know what, my mom actually purchased a weighted stuffed animal. It could be during class when I knew that it would be a time that we would need to take a spelling test or do individual work. So, and this is kind of nice the way that she does that, because she kind of depersonalizes it, and it isn't pedantic in the discussion. She starts off with, hey, could you hold this for me while you're taking your spelling test? And then she goes on explaining how the child took it and how it worked. And all of a sudden, She used it, and at the end of the class, she brought it. At the end of the lesson, she brought it back, and it was a nice experience. It became something that she was entitled to use. And then other kids who were not necessarily 2E looked and said, "Hey, you know what? Can I hold that too?" And the teacher would purchase more items like this or other things that would make this same type of accommodation. So at the end of this,
So,
we created a. Go ahead, Karen. Did you want to say something?
okay. No, go ahead.
So at the end of this, I put together a flow chart for what teachers go through. And this is the process. This is the grounded, for those people who do research, this is the grounded theory that's been bubbling up here. And so the entry in is that a teacher experiences atypical classroom behavior that are actually 2E typical behaviors. So first thing that happens is that they make a note of the 2E typical behavior. And for our sake, we're going to store that to the side, and that'll be important in my dissertation and other work that I do. And then they have to make a decision whether they accept this as 2E, as typical for 2E learners. Now, if the answer is no, and it is a typical 2E behavior, then what can happen is that you can have either you're not making an adaptation, or it could even create a maladaptation where bad stuff can happen and then behaviors escalate. You've been there, done that. On the other hand, if the answer is yes, then you have two choices. And I mentioned this already, but here's the process flow to it. Acknowledge and return to the lesson. And you guys gave some great examples of how of different things that you can ignore and let them do and move on. And then you can also say, well, wait a second, this requires some intervention. It could be that the kid is going to look inside of everybody else's desk and bug them and get involved, or they're pacing around and they're starting to tap other kids. Or so within that context, they go through this creative process of curiosity, investigation, improvisation. And with Karen's example with the checklist, that turned into lesson planning and differentiation, something very thoughtful that you can bring back, or you can do something that you can pull off the shelf in real time. Now, the one I did showed a teacher that was considering it already, but a lot of things teachers don't know what to do in the moment, and they have to get very creative. And if people want to share examples of that, I would love that. And together, those things create an adaptive connection, a positive experience that's happening, and the teachers are connected. And I guess at the end of the day, the word that's really important here is connection. It's adaptive connection within the model that we're looking at. And we know that that connection happens between people over time, and that it doesn't just happen. And as Karen stated earlier, it's even nice when you can loop back and keep getting to know each other, because the work you do today makes a big difference tomorrow and the day after that. And as a teacher, it makes a big difference for you when you're teaching next year and you get a new set of students, or even this year when you have a different student with similar issues. You get more into this habit of, you're working out and you're developing your adaptive connection muscles.
And so all of this loops back, right? So there's a constant looping process here, which is how we start to get into a spiral. So if we think about this, and I brought this up in the beginning, which was really about teaching the whole child, right? It's not just, we're not just delivering curriculum on a platter here. I wanted to tell you all, this is a process that the teachers that I interviewed, that they had experienced in order to be successful. Because you all know that if you're teaching 2E kids, whether it's the whole class that you have or just a few of them in your classroom, if you're not successful, you're not going to stay in teaching. And so what these teachers did was they really wanted to, help their students connect to the subject. So whether it was math, whether it was social studies and English humanities, right? They wanted to find ways. How do I find ways to help my kids connect to this subject? And by doing that, they started to learn more about their students' interests, whether it's gymnastics or birds or Marvel Universe, what have you. But all of a sudden, their perceptions about these kids start to change. Like, wait, you know about how many you know, Oscar nods that each of these actors have got, you know, I mean, to this level of depth that you would not have expected. So their perceptions of their students really changed. And that changed happened to make them, that helped them to mature as educators. Those changes, when they kind of shifted, and it's all about that paradigm shift. Well, as they started to mature, they were developing better relationships with their students. So there's more trust, there's more safety, right, in the classroom. And then they can continue to help them improve their communication skills. So how does that look? Well, these are some of the things that I had found. This was just one of my questions in my research study that I did. And these were some of the themes that I had found here, was that, you know, we know that we need to have a safe classroom, but it's also about trust and acceptance, because kids know it. If you're inauthentic, they're going to smell you out immediately. So it was absolutely paramount that the kids felt that they were accepted and also trusted, because when you have that environment, they will persevere and produce work. A lot of times we may want to create that safe classroom, but we struggle to accept a student. So it's something we need to look at ourselves. Things like looping. So for those of you who may have a self-contained classroom, you may have the same kids for 2 or 3 years. So when you stay with the same teacher, you have that time. You don't have to try to force a relationship in 10 months, right? You've got 2 school years now to really grow together and get to know each other. That kind of takes a little pressure off too. So for those of you who are looping with your kids, wow, more power to you. So there's increased communication. And by the way, looping is not just done in public school, which I've seen it done in low SES middle schools where I live, but I've also seen it in Montessori schools. So where they stay with the same teacher for 3 years in the lower division. In the upper division, 7th and 8th is one group, and 11, 12 is also looped. So the kids will stay together for those with the same teachers. And those are very important grades as well. Increased communication. So these teachers were actually talking about this in terms of understanding from the other staff and teachers at the school site. Right. I heard one of the examples I got was that there was a student who was, she was a gifted writer. I mean, years and years beyond her age. But she really struggled with science, like just didn't want to do it, was doing task avoidance, trying to do anything she could do to get out of the room. And so what they found was if they switched up her schedule where she could do writing and ELA in the morning, she had a win. Right? So she could feel like, okay, I've got this, I can do this, I'm on a roll today, instead of having to start her day with her hardest subject. So knowing your kids and also talking to the other teachers, you may find that one student has a harder time in the afternoon versus the morning. Well, maybe we need to switch the schedule. So keeping that communication open is vital. Advisory groups. So the teachers I interviewed, they met once a week. So this could be your planning meeting that you meet with your team. And they discuss the challenges, but not just challenges. They discuss the successes of those kids too. And it is so important to keep a balance there, right? Even if it's little wins, it's progress over perfection. And then finally, assessments. So the kids are involved in this too. So yes, it included core subjects, right? We know that. But it also included things like perseverance, resilience. Did they advocate for themselves that week? You know, hey, can I please have a different option? Can I have a different seating option, a different choice in my work today? And also self-awareness, right? Hey, I need to go get water. I'm feeling like very anxious somehow, and I feel stressed, and I need to move my body. So that's just self-awareness. And the kids are also given those reports so that they can see their own growth in those areas as well. And so this was really about teaching the whole child. We want them to develop these skills, right? We want them to be able to advocate. We don't just want little machines. So this is where this comes into, and sometimes we don't always include those things in assessments. So something to consider. So just to summarize, Barry, I will let you start with this just because I've been talking.
And I haven't been. So, and we want to bring this all together for you. So it starts with the acknowledgement that the 2E learner is unique. Back to this idea that, uh, 2E typical behavior, a nice metaphor of that is to look at our 2E learners as Pluto, how they don't always revolve and look the same as other kids do.
Also, that we need to accept that this 2E or multi-exceptional learner, they also experience like other exceptionalities besides giftedness, right? Besides a learning difference. There could be so many other things. There could be a divorce going on. There could be a language issue happening here, right? There's so many other pieces. There could be a health issue in the family. So just like we want people to give us grace, not excuses, it's just grace, to also just remember that they're whole people too.
The next part is just a review that we presented that there are two processes involved, or one integrated process of both planning and adaptive connection. And this is how much a teacher engages in this and how creative they get with it is a part of their ability to support multi-exceptional learners.
And to remember too, that even though our growth may seem slower than kids, right? 7 years old, they are not the same kid in the beginning of the year as the end of the year, but that we're all growing at the same time and within the same context. Our growth may look slower and may not be as dramatic, but we're still growing.
Yeah. And that teachers and students are making their same context. And this is really a big deal. And I'm not sure if I think we said this before, but that they're not just growing separately or past each other, but they come together. And all of a sudden they form a dyad and they start to change with each other and develop their own relationship in the context where they have a new set of rules, which they kind of make for each other.
So there are some implications to consider using this spiral model. The first is just that educators need to be acknowledged and supported for engaging in both planning and adaptive connection. A lot of times, I bet a lot of you would probably raise your hand if I said, are you actually acknowledged? You may be acknowledged for delivering curriculum, right? You got through the year. And also planning for your lesson plans. I mean, I have teacher friends of mine who, their principals will want to see their lesson plans. So, but what about the time that you spend engaging in adaptive connection? So they need to be acknowledged for both because it's what helps you be successful.
I'll take number 2. So this is a big one. So our message here isn't that you have to do more. Here, teachers, here's another thing for you to do. But it's more of, it makes more sense if you have more agency over doing this and having that agency supported. And so that as much as the school system wants you to engage in a set of things, you have your job as an educational professional, which is to engage in planning and adaptive connection. And that the system needs to be aware of it, and you should accept having your own agency. Going back to the example of a very rigid teacher, well, they should know that they have the agency to not be rigid, that they can do it, and that it takes time, and that they can learn just like the students learned.
We also talked tonight about the additional factors beyond educational objectives and assessment, by the way, that need to drive instruction. So some of the examples I gave to you, you may have those additional factors. Those could be, this is where their learning difference is, right? This is where that anxiety or perfectionism comes in. So those are factors that we have to consider, the giftedness, the overexcitabilities, let's say. Maybe kids don't necessarily have prior knowledge that you can call upon because you're working in a low SES school with 98% free and reduced lunch, right? So those are definitely additional factors. We can all sit here and talk about, oh, these are our educational objectives, but we need to consider other factors that are going to drive our instruction and instructional methods.
Apply and expand existing resources in common language. So it goes back to what we were saying before, is that it starts here with you in this class that Sarah's organized, is that you have each other to collaborate with, you have your system to collaborate with, and then back in your buildings with the person in the classroom next to you, the people in your same team, your same grade, people who share all of your interests and concerns. Bring stuff together. You know, what we might have shown you a couple of examples here, but the reality is that 99.999% of those examples are already in your building. And you don't necessarily have to create something new. You just have to find them out there and be a team and be collaborative, and to use this understanding that you can constantly change and you can adapt as well as the learner adapts, and that is a constant adaptive process.
And finally, the professionals on the team and the families who support the TUME ME learners, they may have different processes. They may have similar processes, right? I mean, we are all working with kids who are like on a Pluto's orbit, okay? So they are kind of out there sometimes. And the thing is that these processes that we're finding to be successful, they need to be documented for future educators. And that goes beyond just like a weighted blanket or flexible seating. Sometimes the processes that we have not documented is the adaptive connection piece. That's what we need to document for the future. And so now we want to just open this up for some open discussion. If you wanted to see a different slide again, I can go back there. Please let us know, but this is your time. And thank you.
Thanks, Jenny Jones. So I would love to just open this all up here. And
I was gonna say, I'm gonna jump in.
Sarah, were
I
you
don't get to
speaking?
be, yeah, I was gonna say, I don't get to be the student very often in here since I'm teaching the class, but one thing I really picked up on that I think might speak to a majority of our people on this call is, and it goes back to that thing about common language you're saying, when I'm listening to what you had for the adaptive connection process, what I really saw was a positive approach to a functional behavior assessment and to a behavior improvement plan. Because when we do FBAs and BIPs, we're looking to say, this is the problematic behavior and these are the steps we're going to do to change it. But what you guys are saying, it's still like we see a problematic behavior and we want to see something different. But instead of the child being the problem or the thing being the problem, the question instead is it typical or atypical? Is it adaptive or maladaptive? And if it's maladaptive, what are we going to do to make it adaptive? And so, you know, and that's that idea of like, we don't have to recreate the wheel, but maybe at an FBA, yes, we still have the FBA forms we have to fill out because, you know, God knows IEPs love a form. But if we frame the discussion around something like this adaptive connection process, and that would be where one of my questions comes from really is like, I agree, like documenting the process, especially something like that is so important. But coming up with the tool to be able to document it can be a real challenge because some of us are note takers, some of us are checklisty people, but I don't have a common way to like necessarily collect that sort of information. So that would be something I'd be interested in hearing more about, or maybe that's your next vein of research, I don't know. But I'm just seeing as a conversation and a way for us to come in to bring a little bit different mood to the table, especially when we're talking something like an FBA. I mean, that's such a loaded conversation, whether or not everyone's on the same page, and maybe using this language to be more positive about it. Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily a question, but it really hit me.
I'd like to respond to a little bit. I mean, I want to be candid with you about something. So Karen and I are just getting started on this, and we've done our initial research. We're 4 or 5 years into it, and there's so much work that has to be done. And we're always looking for people who will work with us and engage with us. And and one of the things that we've talked about is exactly what you were talking about, Sarah, which is how do we build a system that captures this information that facilitates communication and support and common language going, it could just be a matter of properly using Slack or Google Chat in your building, or who knows? I don't have an answer to that. So all that is, we would love to have people work with us on these topics as well. Next question.
And I could definitely see us. I just wanted to comment on the FBA too. Is that I've been a part of FBAs. I've been on, yeah. I've seen that there's times that there's a teacher. Well, the times that I've seen it more often is when the teacher may be more rigid and expecting more typical behaviors for that age. And so if you have a 6-year-old who is asking and throwing a fit because they're not going to do chemistry this week, which happens, what do you do? So how do you respond? And so Barry and I have actually been talking about how do we create a tool that we can start to document these things. Maybe it's a place that's like a reflective type of a space, right? So those are things that he and I are kind of working on right now. First, he has to finish his dissertation.
I'm getting close.
Yeah. But I just wanted to bring that up because a lot of times we always look at the student and we look at the behavior, but we don't always kind of look back at ourselves. Are we a part of this? Is the physical setting a part of this behavior? What could be those triggers for it? Is it a way that we are or are not responding that could be triggering behavior? And that's a hard thing for us, as adults. Nobody wants to feel like a failure. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just, and finding a way to do this with sensitivity that's been something we've been thinking about.
So Carlson has a question.
Oh, Carlson.
Yeah. Thank you. One thing about like the adaptive behavior, that connection, I think that's such a huge thing. I think also with co-teaching, for me, like I've like a co-teacher or plugging into a classroom where they have completely different expectations than what I have, and following their model by rote would be tough for me, and also vice versa. So, but I've also run into it with school rules. Like I work in a middle school every day. They say, just a reminder, no earbuds, all these things like that. I'm like, and, come into my classroom, like put those earbuds on. If that helps you, if, listening to, Andre 3000 while you're typing a paper, if that helps, like go for it. But you have these messages too. And I think, and just kind of going back to your initial statement, everything is changing so fast.
Right.
What is accepted and what is not, and it's a real blur. I really feel for the twice exceptional students, and especially the students with autism, who are just, everything is just blurring, going so fast, and the rules are constantly changing. But I think it's good to look at some of these technologies like earbuds, listening to music, as ways to, not as like subversive behavior, but as ways to pull students in and get their best work out. That's all.
You know what, Carlson, I once covered for a math teacher in a high school. This was like a couple of years ago, right? And I covered like a whole day. They called me, my district called me, and they're like, can you please just cover? We have nobody else. Okay, fine. So I think it was like 10th grade. It was integrated math. And I go in there, introduce myself, and I said to the kids, I said, you know what, listen, if you work better with music and you can focus on this work, great. Just one earbud, because I'm just asking just for safety, right? I don't know your names. So if we have an earthquake, I have to be able to get you out of here. If you feel like you want to work in a group and you guys can stay on topic and discuss, awesome. Move your desks, right? For me, I don't feel like it's an imposition, because I'm still walking around the classroom and I'm checking in with kids. But the fact is that I gave them choice. I do not have behavior issues in my, like, this is a gen ed room, okay? but I typically don't have behavior issues, because if I'm showing them that level of respect, that everybody learns differently and everybody works different, that I just don't have those issues. It becomes an issue of control and compliance.
You know, one of the things that has been coming out of my research is that teachers kind of have some partial rules around this, which is that they'll see like they know that, let's say, fidget, which everybody, that's full on a part of our context now, right? And so a lot of kids will have a fidget. They'll walk in, and then teachers will ask, well, how do you know that they're learning and they're engaged and they're ready? They're like, well, you know, if they're half involved with the fidget, or if they're doing a few things and I see one or two of those items move away, then I know I got them. That's a quote from one of the interviews that I did. And I think that's an important piece here, is learning how to balance and to know that you don't need to have compliance, not being a controller. Thank you. You don't need to have all those things, but you just need to be balancing out there, and you need to improvise and let it flow. Another great in vivo term that I got in my interviews was let it go. And it's really hard for teachers to just let it go. And another teacher said, you know what, we're so much by nature, teachers are control freaks. I don't know that I fully agree with that. But and he said that the general nature is, and that the challenge for us is to let go of total control. And I think some of us just get control in different ways, is how I see that. So maybe we are control freaks, but we don't need to control every detail, because we know that if we control the broader details, that the smaller stuff will take care of themselves. Thanks, Carlson. That was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Who else would like to share? How much more
Todd
time do we
raised his
have, Sarah?
hand. We've got half an
Yay.
hour. Yeah, Todd raised
Oh,
his
good.
hand.
So I hope that I can make this make sense. It connects to what you just said, Barry, and it also connects to one of Sarah's statements. One of the things that really I connected to was the context for the teacher and the elements within that being all fluid. And as you know, those things are changing for us, and we're changing in those things. What's the word? Ideally, we're growing. And I think the question or the issue is about like how we're growing and how we perceive our growth in that. Because Barry, with what you said, I think as that change is happening for some of us, that change is leading us into the direction of either continuing to be controlling or becoming more controlling and believing that we're growing because that's, you know, what the experience is from the growth, as opposed to the change opening us up to be more acceptive and more, I guess, receiving of the differences that are there. And another thing, I had so many questions along the way, and you all kept on answering my questions. But you know, I still kind of want to say this, and hopefully, you know, it's meaningful and helpful. That you know, there's another thing that really stood out to me was the change that teachers made from being driven by the curriculum to being, I guess, more concerned with communication, you know, with the children, and just wondering how, for some teachers, assuming, I guess, that for some teachers, the contextual change took them from their, what's the word that I would use again here? Devotion, dedication to, I'm sorry if this offends anybody, to the curriculum, to the understanding, you know, the need for communication and that, you know, developing relationship, so that the kids are enveloped now in an environment, in a context where learning is meaningful, you know, learning is interesting, and, you know, they're really invited and hopefully inspired to learn. So I think you may have answered it, but I still am going to ask the question with that, you know, as we want teachers and staff period, I think, within the educational setting, within the school setting, to be, more flexible to us molding to what the kids really need. What now I got to figure out how to ask the question. I apologize. For and I'll say this too, that Barry, your model of the adaptive connection may answer this question, but what are some factors, I guess, that no, this is how I want to ask the question. So in my role as a school psychologist, I would love to be able to be effective in helping teachers make that transition who don't necessarily understand that, or who don't see it as that's the transition that they should be making, and that they are holding to remaining in control, as opposed to embracing moving to being more flexible to what really works for the student. I hope that my statement and my question makes sense.
That makes so much sense, Todd.
Okay.
And I totally understand where you're going with this. The teachers that I interviewed, they were not in public school. One of them had worked in public school before he went to this small private school, right? Part of why these teachers felt that they could shift from one sort of modality of thinking of like, here's our curriculum, here's the grouping I have to use, right? Like, here's our scope and sequence. They still kept on the scope and sequence because they know they're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but part of this was that these teachers were supported by the administration and the staff, that they know what they're doing, that they are their curriculum experts, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, that example I gave of the humanities teacher switching out, instead of writing about a Greek mythological hero, write about somebody from the Marvel universe, but here's here's your rubric that you still have to follow, right? And all of a sudden you've got a kid who struggles to string together 3 sentences, who's like really engaged to persevere and push through something hard, because now you're going to have growth. But I don't know if these teachers would have felt like that if they weren't given not just, and when I say support, it was pervasive, right? It wasn't just, talk. I mean, part of that support was having the weekly meetings to discuss, like, where are the kids? Are they showing things like, self-advocacy or resilience and perseverance, like some of those softer skills that are, and having examples of it, because then they're sharing it with the other teachers. So what happens is that even in elementary school, right? Like, you've got kids who have one primary teacher, maybe 2, but then they all talk. And so if a kid had a rough year that year, and then they go on to the next year, now they've already got all this baggage that's following them, right? So it was about the communication, not just from above, but also amid. And to know they were supported in saying, hey, I know you know about humanities or math or whatever the topic is, but if you have kids who are builders and they're going to learn math better by doing this with Legos, right? They need manipulatives. They don't want to sit there with pencil and paper. Have them teach the class, right? So giving them other opportunities to show what they know and just assess them on the spot, right? It's like doing your presentation. You're being assessed. You didn't do a paper, you did a presentation. So I think that those were 2 really big pieces of it, is that the staff were able to move out of that rote mentality of, I have to stay on scope and sequence.
And Dr. Arnstein, I think in what you just said, helped me to identify or re-identify why I still wanted to ask the question, because, and part of that I see, or part of what I see in that is that seeing the change happen from what they do inspires them to do more of it. And I guess my concern is with those who need to move to doing what's going to create those changes in how the kids respond to them before they are doing it, to see the effect of doing it, if that makes sense.
Right. And
And I'd like
sometimes
to
you may have a
be,
teacher who's kind of already a little bit ahead in this, you know, this adaptive connection with their students. And so you can even use them as like a role model. And like, oh, look at this was successful with this kid who, you know, is autism or ADHD or what have you, or dyslexia, but they were actually successful. Like, here, go ahead, or give them time to observe, right? How is this done? So that that builds their confidence. That's a way to show that you support them, that they do have agency. You know, it's one thing for us to say, oh, you just have to do this, but it's another that says, I support you. I'm going to be in your classroom and cover for you for half an hour while you observe this other teacher who's already doing it. See what I mean? Yeah.
And I'm going to broken record a bit, and then we'll go to Katie. You know, just acknowledging that Sarah puts this together on a district level and makes these types of conversations accessible really does answer a lot of that, Todd, because she's changing the zeitgeist from within the program with all the
Yeah.
things that she's bringing in. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. So well done, Sarah. Katie?
Thanks. I just wanted to pipe up, I guess, and with Todd's question, I think it's a really good question. But I also think, like, so I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I'm teaching an enriched literacy class. And I think, you know, there are a lot of teachers that are very open to and using a lot of these strategies in practice. But I also think, you know, it's important to talk about what some of the challenges are. And so, like, one of the things I was thinking about asking you earlier in class is, um, especially with twice exceptional kids, I have some kids who what they really need and the way they really need to learn are kind of like in direct conflict with each other. And so, you know, when we talk about control and like needing control, for me personally, a lot of that is like almost like crowd control. It's just how can I, you know, help you and you all learn the way that's best for you, but not in a way that's going to trigger each other. And so I think, you know, when you get that pushback from teachers, sometimes it's teachers who really are trying to incorporate lots of different methods and learning styles, but we also need help and support with how to do that in one classroom.
Yeah. I
I
agree.
almost wonder, you know, when we talk about things like cluster grouping and like how we are selecting students for a classroom and we want heterogeneous classrooms, which I do believe have value, maybe the questions that we need to ask are not whether or not this is their strength or area of giftedness, especially if we have a lot of mixed level classrooms, but rather, do we have our kids who work better in this method? You know, some kids do like to sit in rows and face forward. Maybe thinking about, you know, or surveying the kids at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, like what environment works best for you, and then kind of matching them that way. Because you're right, if you don't have the behavior management and you're not playing referee for the kid who needs the pace versus the kid who wants quiet, you have more time to put energy into other types of differentiation, like curriculum differentiation or SEL differentiation.
Yeah.
So share that with your principal. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to try a whole new thing next year.
You know, a lot of what's talked about, I've seen in my interviews, is that, and this is interesting, so I'm glad you put that slide up, Karen, is that
Yeah.
so much of this goes back into planning, and it depends on which model you're working with. You know, I have my prejudice. I'm at Bridges Graduate School, so to me, the work of Susan Baum and the Bridges education model really tries to get as many kids as possible to engage in their preferred style of learning and how they work. And that starts with communication up front, and then figuring out the right grouping, and then how to organize kids, and then all the things that Karen was talked about, talking about too, is really all a part of it. So I would suggest taking a look at the Bridges education model and the work of Susan Bauman. If you want more examples or just books to read, just email me. I put our emails in the chat, and I'll send you the books, or come join us at Bridges Graduate School as well. We do teacher certification and doctoral programs and master's programs.
And yes, pretty much every week I'm going to have a different speaker talking up a different graduate program. So I think we've heard from Hopkins, we've got Cleveland State, we've got William and Mary coming. There are so many opportunities now that didn't exist 2 years ago, even.
Oh my gosh.
For doctoral work, for master's degrees, for certification, for twice exceptional, both in and outside of Maryland. So yeah, I like the
And
plug.
of course, the best is Bridges Graduate School. I'm just saying that, Claire. I hope you agree.
$50,000 a year, the best is Bridges. Actually, I want to elevate what Brian.
Hey.
Oh,
Different areas of emphasis, different, we
100%.
collaborate together, not compete.
Not at all.
100%.
Not at all. We think you're wonderful.
As we said once, if we can get to the point that there's enough folks out there that we could compete with each other, that'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
In the meantime,
right,
we got to collaborate, because we're all, there's enough success for everybody.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Enough work for everybody.
I invite all of you guys to come talk up your programs, because we all have different areas of thought and emphasis.
Mm-hmm. And we all complement each other in really different ways. It's fascinating to me how we add into this process of this piece.
Katie, I just wanted to say, Sarah, just to respond to Katie really quick. Katie, I think it is a good idea that you actually ask the kids towards the end of the year what they would prefer for their classroom style. I think that's not a bad idea.
And if you need help, conversing with your administration, I'm always up for a good discussion. I wanted to elevate what Brian had put in the chat. And I think what he's talking about right there is it's something I feel like we see way too much, especially in a system our size. I mean, you guys know we're a big school system. We have 168,000 students. And, that's, we're chipping away at a giant iceberg here. But I think try again. Going back to this adaptive connection model piece, when we're talking about identifying kids, because I agree with Brian, like so frequently, and Brian used to be at the district level with me, and now he's working in a smaller cluster on the behavior support piece, but specifically looking at our low SES kids, our Black and brown kids who display these traditional twice exceptional behaviors, and yet because of those other mitigating factors, because of that thrice exceptionality, they're so much more likely to be identified as emotional disability, confined to emotional disability programs. There's not a lot of, help me out, Brian, there's not a lot of understanding, I think, of these things are, like you guys are saying, typical for this population. You just have to get used to this population and understand what is typical. And then that goes back to, whether or not teachers can ignore a behavior or not. And just knowing that their teachers can be so much more sensitive when Black and brown students are doing the same behavior that our non-Black and brown students are doing, and they end up in two different pathways doing the exact same thing. And I think, just kind of, it's another way to frame it, because if you are starting from a place of, is this a typical behavior of this profile, instead of, is this a problematic behavior based on this age, it's a whole different conversation. And then that goes back to root cause. Brian.
Sorry, going back to the intersectionality that you brought up earlier about, we all have our story, right? Because there's what we think of, and I think we've probably from Sarah's help is we've really built an understanding of what 2E is traditionally, right? And I think if we look at our programs, and Sarah's helped me fight some battles over the years on this, is if you look at our programs, they look a certain way, right? It's a very narrow view of 2E. It's a quirky, awkward, socially naive, upper middle class white kid, right? And that's not what 2E is. And I'll stop talking there because I'll get a little worked up.
Well, let's be honest, even gifted as like white male or Asian male is not what gifted is either. And they're also not high achievers, right, Brian? So yeah, so that's again that same kind of narrow perspective of who teachers might refer, and they do end up on different pathways. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm working with Sarah right now because through Purdue and with Dr. Olenchek and Dr. Claire Hughes, who's here with us too. I mean, we're working to bring positive psychology into schools to use those concepts of positive psychology and the EPIC model to identify kids for either for who are already 2E, they are 2E and they haven't been identified. Maybe they're English learners. They have a different racial or ethnic makeup than the typical kids that we see in those programs. So yeah, we're working on it.
Okay, and for context for our MCPS folks, like the process right now, it's we review universal screening in 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th grade. We're not using any cognitive testing right now, so it's all performance-based or teacher or parent checklist based. And you're either on that pathway for identification, or the other one is you submit private testing or testing that came through an IEP team to me, and then I wave my magic wand, I guess, and we have that ability to identify. What we're trying to do is add additional pathways. And my motto on this is I've presented 6 different pathways, because if we get it reduced down to 3, I'll be really happy, because that's 2 more than we have right now. But this is one of the pathways that I really want us to like propose and bring in, because yes, it does take a lot of resources, but it also, and my hope is that it's going to take resources that we're already using and use them in different ways. And maybe we'll take out some of the things that we're doing, which are not effectual checklists, and bring in things that are effectual, or more effective than what we are doing now. So it's baby steps. Like this week, Karen and Rick are meeting with us on Friday to talk to my supervisor and some other folks, just to kind of get that first foot in the door, and then we're hoping to move it from there. But I know at least half of the folks on the call tonight are actively involved in that identification process. But then, when we think about what we contribute to that process versus how kids are identified, it's not I don't even know the word for it. It's not working out. I think that's the best way to say it. Like, it works for who it works for, and it's worked for them for the last 25 years, but it's not working for the majority of kids when we're considering how to identify them. So I'm personally really excited, and I was tasked with explaining it this morning, and I did it in like 2 minutes, so hopefully I got it right. But I'm really excited to have some additional methods, because as we've talked about throughout this whole thing, you can't properly plan for your kids until you know who your kids are. And so as much as
Right.
Labels aren't always the thing, sometimes you need those labels, because if you're not looking for it, you're not going to plan for it. If you're going to look for typical and plan for typical, and we need to look for our outliers and plan for them, and then everybody else will find their way. So I will say, because we did not give you guys a break tonight, I know Claire wanted to share a little bit about her action research work, but Karen and Barry, I just thank you so much. This has been amazing, and not just because I didn't have to talk the whole time this week. I absolutely appreciate it, and I've been uploading and downloading videos, so this one I will get up for everybody. But anytime you can bring something so brand new to the table, it does wonders for the kids. And I think you guys have brought together so many great things and different ways for us to look at information that we know that we're just not applying in this way. And I really like that. We always say, you know, we're data rich and knowledge poor. And I think this is another way to look at our data and have better knowledge about how we're working with our kids. So thank you so much. And Claire, I'm going to kick it over to you. And
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you
Oh,
for
I'm-
having us,
Thanks.
everybody.
And I'm just gonna
Bye,
follow
guys.
up with
Thanks for
this.
having us.
Yeah, that was that was truly moving it forward, moving the conversation forward, moving the concepts forward. I even the spirals of how everything sort of the planets go around the sun and how we've shifted on that. I think one of the most fascinating concepts that I'm sitting here mulling about is the mutual growth related to each other between teacher and student, and how teachers evolve because of students. And so that sort of gravitational pull, to keep coming back to that analogy, is a really, really fascinating one. As somebody involved in teacher preparation, I'm particularly interested in the growth of teachers and teacher skills and teacher knowledge as well. So it's a you've given me a lot to think about. One of the things, and I'm just going to follow up kind of what I said earlier, is that, can I share? Would that be?
Thank you, Claire. See you guys later. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Oh, no, you don't need that. Oh, I'm there. Okay. If you go to the website and you find the conference, if you're interested in conference, our goal on that Thursday is to do what's called an action research. And the goal for that is much of our, if you start looking at the actual research in terms of evidence-based practices, there are no evidence-based practices for twice exceptional kids. There are for kids with special needs, there are kids for gifted kids, and you can kind of inference and do a lot of what Karen and Barry just talked about, but y'all are the ones living it. And so on Thursday, we're doing an action research focus, which is basically in the absence of evidence-based practices, what kind of practice-based evidence do we have? And so it's an opportunity for y'all to share what you're doing. It's also an opportunity for you to learn from what you're doing. And that's why I was so excited about these ideas that they're talking about of being responsive, both as a person and as a curriculum, of how can we pull that together. So, and what kind of impact does it have? So I'd encourage y'all very, very much. That is an in-person piece though. And on Friday and Saturday, it's hybrid in terms of sharing strategies. It's less action research oriented and more focused on sharing and swapping information. So Karen, I'm hoping will be able to do something with us on that Thursday afternoon, but you know, we shall see and work that out. So one of the things that y'all
2 seats in my car, so.
What?
I still have 2 seats in my car. I got 2 spoken for and 2 were left. So
there you go. And it's not a terrible drive, and it's even better in September when it's not pouring rain like it was in October. So thank you all very, very, very much. And I hope that y'all are considering it, because y'all are one of the things I hope you feel, because I love coming to Sarah's class, is this community that is a global community actually, but very national network of how we're all growing as well. The field is growing, teachers are growing, and we're learning more and more about kids. And it's so exciting to be with y'all and to have places where we can talk about that and to collaborate with these scholars. So thank you very much, Sarah, for having me. And thank you very much, Karen, for inviting me to come along as on your journey as well. Stop sharing.
thank you, everybody. And I will have the conference information for, I post all of the conference information up. And like I said in the chat, if you are interested in putting in a proposal for presenting, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to kind of talk you through the process and what's expected. And Claire's application is the least scary of all of them. So if you're looking to cut your teeth somewhere, because it's teachers talking to teachers about teaching, it's a great place to start if you haven't done any presentations before, but you still get 2 CPD credits for if you present at a national conference. So this is a 3-credit class. You get 2 if you are accepted and present at Cleveland, and that's 5 of your 6 credits for renewal. So there you go. I'm glad to bring all your renewal credits right to you. Thank you guys as always. Have a great night. I'm just going to cut us off since we didn't get that break tonight, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Yeah, I'll straighten out the discussion board. I don't know why Canvas hates me so much this time around.